Her most recent book, The Dynamics of Inheritance on the Shakespearean Stage, is forthcoming from Cambridge University Press. Please join me in welcoming Michelle Dowd.
Thank you, and thanks for all of you for staying, for being here. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers. It's kind of an interesting play to see on Father's Day, I must say. But I truly thank you for your time and for staying. Oswald at Emswell was first published in 1623 in the First Folio, or the first collected edition of Shakespeare's works. In that edition, it was grouped together with Shakespeare's other comedies, including Twelfth Night, As You Like It, and A Midsummer Night's Dream. But modern criticism of the play, dating back to at least the early 20th century, has not been entirely comfortable with the label of comedy, and is instead often labeled Oswell a problem play, together with such darker comedies as Measure for Measure, and tonally uneven plays such as Troilus and Cressida. In general, the term problem play simply means that the play doesn't fit easily within a single dramatic genre. Oswald contains aspects of both comedy and tragedy, and the happy resolution is more difficultly attained than in most of Shakespeare's more famous romantic comedies. But given the long-standing critical consensus that Oswell is indeed a problem play, it is well worth asking, what is the problem exactly? And whose problem is it? For many of those who have written about the play over the years, the problem of Oswell lies less in its comedic structure than in its characters. Now, Bertram certainly does pose a kind of dilemma within the play, as he is without a doubt one of the least appealing of Shakespeare's romantic male protagonists. But, interestingly, most of the negative commentary about the play's characters is directed not at Bertram, but at Oswell's two female leads, Helena and the Countess. Many critics, in fact, seem almost to take Bertram's side against Helena and the Countess, whom Bertram finds unduly restrictive throughout much of the play. One recent scholar, for instance, accuses Helena of possessing a, quote, tenacity too nearly predatory to be completely attractive or satisfying, while others find fault in her efficiency, which they argue keeps readers and audiences from fully sympathizing with her. Many modern critics, that is, respond negatively to what they view as the excessive authority granted Helena and the Countess within the play, an authority that enables them ultimately to redirect Bertram's own actions. But what might Shakespeare's initial audiences have thought about these female characters when the play was first performed in 1603 or 1604? And why might Shakespeare have chosen to tell this particular story of a recalcitrant husband by emphasizing the roles played by his mother and his wife? We can begin by considering some aspects of the play structure and the changes Shakespeare made to his source material. Shakespeare's main source for the plot of Oswell is a story found in Boccaccio's Decameron, translated into an English version in the middle of the 16th century. But Shakespeare's story also follows a narrative pattern that we can trace back to older medieval fairy tales, and that is sometimes referred to as the Loathly Lady story. In this story, which is depicted in Chaucer's Wife of Bath's tale, a woman is despised by a knight because he finds her ugly or unworthy. However, the woman knows the answer to a crucial life-saving question. As a reward for providing the answer to this question, the woman gets to choose her husband. Although the husband initially detests the wife, he ultimately accepts her as she is, and then she is transformed into a beauty. In Oswell, Shakespeare subtly updates this fairy tale by depicting Helen not as physically ugly, but as of lower social status than Bertram, who rejects her as unworthy. Instead of knowing the answer to a riddle or question, Helena possesses the life-saving medical skills required to save the king, who grants her the right to marry Bertram. And in the end, Helena does not need to become more beautiful or even socially worthy in order for Bertram to change his opinion of her. Instead, it is Bertram who must learn to accept the woman he actually married, rather than hold out hopes of a fairy tale transformation of his bride. But Shakespeare also makes a significant change to both the fairy tale structure and his direct literary source material by including not one, but two assertive female leads in his comedy. Oswell thus further extends and complicates the fairy tale pattern of the Loathly Lady by essentially splitting the main female character into two characters, both of whom take the place of absent, dead fathers, as the Countess makes clear in her opening lines of the play, "In delivering my son from me, I bury a second husband." The Countess as a character is completely Shakespeare's invention. She has no counterpart in any of his sources for the play, and her presence alongside Helena as a strong, active female protagonist is fairly unusual for Shakespearean comedy. So why add this character? And why focus the play on the actions taken by these two women? One thing this setup allows Shakespeare to do is to highlight the role of wives and mothers within a culture that, theoretically at least, did not seem to allow women much authority. In many ways, wives and mothers held ambivalent positions in English Renaissance society. Shakespeare's England was a patriarchal culture in which women were denied many legal rights. Married women, for instance, could not own property or write wills, and unmarried daughters were expected to follow the orders and instructions of their fathers. However, at the same time, post-Reformation discourse about the centrality of family and marriage to social well-being granted women a kind of privileged status within the family. Mothers were expected to educate their children, both sons and daughters, and wives were often in charge of running the household, a job that might include managing servants as well as balancing account books. So we might say that Shakespeare's England was a transitional period historically, in which new ideas about the importance of women within the family were in tension with long-standing ideas about male superiority. Both the Countess's husband, Bertram's father, and Helena's father are deceased when the play opens, and this absence of fathers in All's Well gives Shakespeare a dramatic opportunity to explore the roles that wives and mothers might take in educating their households and ensuring good order in their families. Bertram initially acts the way many young male protagonists do in Shakespeare's comedies. He resists authority, behaves somewhat wildly, even prodigally, and is in desperate need of some instruction about how to become a good husband. Bertram's reluctance to marry a doctor's daughter would have been more understandable to Shakespeare's audience than it is to us. Doctors were just emerging as professionals in the 17th century and were considered middle class and thus of lower status than Bertram, the son of a count. Nevertheless, the king makes it clear that Bertram has no need to scorn Helena's birth because, as the king reminds him, he can build up Helena's title. By the time All's Well was written, social status was becoming much more mobile and flexible than it had been previously. So the king's appeal to Helena's merit and deeds as a precursor to title, which he could add later, would have resonated with Shakespeare's audience. Furthermore, in refusing Helena, Bertram refuses the king, making him not only a bad son and husband-to-be, but a bad and potentially unruly subject. So Bertram has much to learn. But instead of being tutored by a father or a male friend, Parolles, of course, provides only a bad example for Bertram to follow. Bertram must be instructed by first his mother and ultimately his wife. Indeed, one of the brilliant moves that Shakespeare makes in All's Well is marrying off Helena and Bertram midway through the play, unlike most romantic comedies, which end with marriage. As a result, All's Well draws our attention to the difficulties of making marriage work by focusing on a marriage in progress, one that isn't happily ever after from the beginning, but instead must be worked on, improved, and perfected over time, and as it happens over the course of the play. The Countess takes the initial role in educating her son, and part of her responsibility is in fact to see him well married. She asserts her moral authority within her family through her blessing to Bertram in the first scene of the play as she sends him off to court, noting, however, that he is an unseasoned courtier who will need to be taught some manners. But ultimately, the Countess cannot do this job alone. As the Countess disappears from the play's action midway through, the story shifts focus to Helena's pursuit of Bertram in Florence. Shakespeare, that is, summons another female character to finish the job of educating the recalcitrant lord. After hearing Bertram's written ultimatum to Helena, the Countess makes a clean break from her son, transferring her benevolent attention entirely to Helena. She says, "He was my son, but I do wash his name out of my blood, and thou art all my child." As the Countess's delicate and virtuous successor in the play's final acts, Helena takes on the task of educating Bertram and correcting his unruly attitudes towards marriage and social order. We get an early hint that Helena understands that manners and virtue are not simply personality traits automatically transferred from parents to children, but qualities that must be earned, developed, and even bettered in her discussion with the Countess about her own medical skills. Describing her remedy to cure the king, Helena says, "There's something in it more than my father's skill, which was the greatest of his profession." Helena thus takes a value-added approach to her own legacy from her father that is reminiscent of the biblical parable of the talents. It is not enough that she is her father's daughter. She must offer more than her father's skill in order to treat the king successfully. Similarly, Helena must outcraft Bertram through the bed trick, the event that ultimately makes Bertram see the error of his ways. And the odd logic of the bed trick, the child must be produced before the marriage that legitimizes that child can be retroactively validated, and the ring must be exchanged before Bertram will acknowledge Helena as his wife, suggests that it is the marriage and Bertram's proper role in it that needs to be secured, not the child per se. Though it is the child that convinces Bertram to reform his ways, the logic of the bed trick works to resuscitate a marriage badly in need of social legitimacy and reconciliation. Here and elsewhere in the play, Shakespeare depicts Helena and the Countess as transmitters of traditional values and standards of behavior, but also as sources of domestic healing and knowledge unavailable elsewhere in the play. Through the joint figures of Helena and the Countess, Allswell depicts the role of women in sustaining marriage as a cultural institution in Renaissance England. Because there are no fathers alive to help out directly, Shakespeare can turn attention to the work that wives and mothers must perform to ensure that things end well, that marriage in this case is sustaining and successful. Although critics have occasionally responded negatively to the play over the years because of the assertiveness of its female characters, I would suggest that the real paradox or problem of the play is how to represent women's active involvement in social and familial life within a culture that theoretically excluded them from such involvement. In Allswell, Shakespeare demonstrates that female authority is ultimately necessary to social harmony, not a barrier to it. So for many of the play's critics, it is women who pose a problem for comic order. It seems that Shakespeare argues instead that women provide a solution as well. Thank you.